Ahora se ha puesto mucho de moda que los extranjeros se pueden hablar del uso de los chiles en la cocina, nos quieren explicar cómo se usan. Son pendejadas. No vas a venir a decirle a un mexicano cómo usar el chile en la cocina. Now that is a quote from a Mexican chef who's going to remain unnamed, who's very angry, talking about mostly Americans and Canadians and their perspectives on the use of chilies in cooking. I think he's partially correct in his anger, because Mexico is the undisputed titan of the use of chilies in cuisine. There are many cuisines that use chilies extensively, of course, the Chinese, the Indians, other parts of the Americas, but Mexico has the biggest variety of chilies and with the largest number of applications. Today we're talking about chiles, spiciness, and its use in Mexican cooking.
It's a lot of righteous anger, isn't it? Especially when it comes to spiciness. Recently, we've had this wave of digital nomads, and you have no idea how, as an editor for a long time, I had about 58 billion people propose to me that there was a really interesting news story since, say, 2019? And it was about the Americans coming down to Condesa here in Mexico City, the Condesa neighborhood, and making the sauces in the restaurants get less and less spicy because they couldn't take it. And so restaurants catered to these high-paying American customers, making Condesa sauces very mild. I don't know if that's true or not, because I've gone to a few, maybe you're going to the wrong restaurants. I've gone to a few taco stands on the street in Condesa where you're still getting offered la que pica y la que no pica. Well, could you explain what that is, Tavo?
Both of them are a lie, because one means the one that's spicy and the one that isn't spicy, but they're all spicy.
Yeah, one is incredibly spicy and one is only slightly less spicy, and that's the one that isn't spicy.
It's a tricky thing. I mean, my perspective after my latest visit to Mexico was that sauces are still very spicy. Even in the poshest of neighborhoods, I still found myself sweating at one point or another because I put too much salsa on something. But it is tricky, because chiles and the use of chiles in Mexican cuisine goes a lot further than just things being spicy or not, right? It's a very important cultural element, the use of spice for spiciness, for something to be hot. So much so that we have a verb for it, which I think says a lot. Like when someone has had too much spice and you're sweating and you just can't take it anymore, we have a verb which is to be enchilado, to be chilied out, let's say.
Enspicened.
Which I think goes to show just how important spicened, goes to show how important chiles and things being spicy is to Mexican culture. But at the same time, I think the biggest role of chiles in Mexican cuisine has nothing to do with their spice level. What do you think?
There's a lot of machismo around it, especially I think, funnily enough, around non-Mexican populations. Like, you'll go to a curry house in England and there'll be a big fuss made about how these lads will be able to have the spiciest curry on the menu. That's not really a thing here in Mexico, which I think is interesting because people might expect that. What's funny is it's also kind of a given. There's almost an inbuilt immunity to some of it, seen in a wonderful display during the World Cup in Brazil, where there was a sort of prank show. The Brazilian host went out to give spicy food to Mexicans to sort of prank them. And they didn't find it spicy at all. And then they made him eat some and he was weeping because apparently Brazilians aren't that used to spicy food. So there is an inherent, innate knowledge about spiciness and tolerance to it. It comes from the fact that a lot of Mexican candy, a lot of Mexican sweets are made with chili, which a lot of foreigners find difficult to understand. It's sweet and spicy. But that actually has roots in the depths of Mexican history. Because ultimately, back in pre-Hispanic times, before the Aztecs, before most of the civilizations we spoke about in the previous episode, chili was very much part of not only a day-to-day diet, but of ritual and of people's lives. So you were not only exposed to chili's tastes, but to its smells, to smoke, sometimes used as a biological weapon. So chili wasn't just an ingredient, it was an essential part of ritual, culinary, and just daily life in the age of the pre-Hispanic person.
Part of the reason for that is that chiles come originally from the Americas. There are plenty of things that are used in cuisine of different countries of Latin America that didn't originally come from the Americas. tamarind, famously. Most Mexicans will refuse to accept that tamarind is not originally...
I didn't know that. That's the Colombian exchange, isn't it? Really, really mixed up culinary ingredients all around the world. I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Exactly. Tamarind comes from India, and Mexicans will fight you on this. They'll say, no, this is Mexican. It's as Mexican as it comes. No, it came from India. But on the flip side, chiles came from the Americas. There's doubt exactly as to where they came from.
There is a lot of silly and petty competition, and it's the classic petty competition in the Americas between Peruvians and Mexicans on the basis of where chilies are from and where they were domesticated. I think we can more or less safely say that the earliest specimens of chilies can be found in the sort of Andean area, so point for the Chileans. But apparently the oldest indications of domestication are Mesoamerica, so that's the Mexican, Central American side. So they're sort of tied on that, but it does feel very petty, doesn't it?
Incredibly petty. And to add to the pettiness, when I was reading up on this, I found that it was in Bolivia, modern-day Bolivia, where chiles were originally found. So not Chile. But, everyone has their own claim on this. But yes, no, exactly. I think there is some measure of agreement on the fact that it was first domesticated somewhere around Yucatan, somewhere around Guerrero, which is in the south of modern-day Mexico. And it's particularly important because once it was domesticated, it was used, and it was used widely. And as you said, it became not only something that was used in cuisine, but it was used in everything. Home remedies for pains, biological weapons, or in the earliest form, and many other uses.
There's an interesting case where in the sort of spiritual realm, there would be a daily ritual in which people, in the sort of sense of prayer, instead of lighting up incense from the Catholic era, they would burn chilies. And that would basically make them cough and splutter, and it would be a very unpleasant experience. But it was part of the connection with the gods. And to an extent, maybe, in the same way that we are getting children used to spiciness when we give them spicy candy when they're children, maybe they were also getting used to the fact that chili was, as you say, used as a weapon of war. They would use burning chilies to make the enemy splutter and cough and break ranks as they were being attacked. And so, again, a really fascinating part of the pre-Hispanic world was the realm of the ritual basically invading everything from, of course, food, which we sort of understand intuitively in the modern age, but also warfare, the holy war and the ritual war, often carried out on a schedule, and you'd meet out on the battlefield, and you actually wouldn't want to kill people because you'd want to capture them to bring them back and sacrifice them. And chilies, being part of, the prayer, ritual of prayer, and then being taken out onto the battlefield as a weapon, but also as part of this continuation of the ritual on the battlefield.
Now, of course, we don't usually have battles like that anymore in Mexico. Now Chile is mostly restricted to the kitchen.
I beg to differ. The street battles that you'll see, not only in Mexico, but across the world, I mean, there's a reason it's called pepper spray. We're still using these old methods to break the ranks of our enemies. This time, old ladies protesting more expensive milk or whatever. And before you charge in with the batons, you spray them with, and it's called pepper spray for a reason. It's got, is it pronounced capsicum? I never know. I never know what the term is, but it's got the active ingredient of spice inside this chemical weapon that is used to disperse people.
Look at that. The Aztecs are still around us.
They're always present. Capsicum. It's capsaicin. Capsicum is a red pepper, isn't it? Capsaicin is the active ingredient in spice. And interestingly, a little sort of fun fact before we move on, apparently birds can't feel it. So we'll be like weeping and snotting away after we've eaten a chili, but birds will nibble away at the spiciest habanero and they won't feel it a thing. And you can actually see why that's the case, right? Because the way that these seeds are dispersed are through the droppings of birds, most likely. Tropical birds that would eat that chili, consume the spicy seeds, which are the spiciest part of the chili, and then move out into the air and drop them somewhere far away. And you don't want some pesky mammal eating your seeds and dropping them just nearby. And so you've got this defensive measure, the capsaicin, that makes not only the fruit spicy, but also the precious seeds, the spiciest thing in that combination.
I didn't know that. That actually makes a lot of sense. Now, but you talked about the very spicy habanero. And we've said the spiciness is important in Mexican cuisine, but it's not the only thing. I think we can talk briefly about Scoville units. Is a very sort of not Mexican
American
thing. Yeah, I didn't want to say American, but there you go. The Americans are trying to give everything a scale. It's all about which one's the spiciest, which one has the most Scoville units, because the more Scoville units you have, the spicier the chili.
In Mexico, we've got a far better measure, which is no pica, which means it is spicy, pica, which means it's very spicy, pica mucho, which means probably shouldn't be tasting it, and the top of the measure, which was a phrase coined by my great uncle, which was he'd take a bite. He knew this sauce very well. He would take a bite and he'd say, hija de su madre. And hija de su madre means it is incredibly spicy beyond repair. And I believe that that's what my family now calls a very special chili sauce from where my grandmother's from in the state of Veracruz. We call it la hija de su madre in honor of how spicy that sauce is.
I love that. And I have to say that the spiciest salsas I've ever eaten have been in the Tabasco, Veracruz region. So this really speaks to me. But to be fair, the majority of the spiciest chilies in the world are not in Mexico, and they're not used in Mexican cuisine. You do have habanero, you do have chiltepin, which are exceptionally spicy, upwards of 100,000 Scoville units. But the spiciest, the California Reaper and these kinds of things, which are in the millions, that is not a thing in Mexican cuisine at all. So, comparatively speaking, really, Mexican cuisine is not that spicy, particularly because the majority of the chilies that we use on the day-to-day have a very low number of Scoville units. Famously, the poblano pepper, used for the very famous chile en nogada, only has about 1,000 Scoville units. So habanero, 100,000-ish. It can be a lot more. And poblano peppers, about 1,000. So not that spicy.
No, and again, right, the flavor is what's important in the cuisine. So you'll often have a stuffed poblano chili. We'll get onto chiles en nogada very soon. And you won't know if it's spicy until you bite into it. And so that's a sort of wonderful part of the adventure of Mexican cuisine. Another important distinction between chilies isn't so much whether they're spicy or not, it's whether they're fresh or they've been preserved through drying. And that's such an important distinction that there's different names for a fresh chili and the same chili when it's been dried. I'd like to test you, Tavo.
Go on.
I'd like to test you on your knowledge of which fresh chili becomes what dry chili. So, a chile serrano becomes?
Chile de árbol.
God, you're good. Poblano.
Ancho?
Yes, you're so good at this. I'd be hopeless. And it's crazy because I will use a lot of these chilies, but really not remember where they come from, right? We've become alienated from the origins of these foods. And then there's other chilies that I sincerely do not even use when they're in their fresh version, but they become a very common ingredient once they've been dried.
Yeah, for sure. For example, chile chilaca, which I believe is when dried, is chile pasilla. Chile pasilla is used extensively in Mexican cuisine, but I don't think I've ever had chile chilaca. I remember hearing about it. I know it exists. I've just never had it. At least I don't know that I've had it. But what's really interesting, or was really interesting to me, is when we were recently in Milpa Alta in the southeast of Mexico City in March, which is, it's the agricultural heartland of Mexico City and a very agricultural area. We went to this store run by this fantastic old lady, and she had all sorts of chiles. They were all dried, and she had moles and a whole range of things. And when I was asking about the chilies, there were a few dried chilies I didn't know, I had never heard of. So I was asking, what chili does this come from? And she kind of looked at me with a face of, I don't know, nor do I care. I sell dried chilies, all right? That's what they're called. Take them or not.
Yeah, there's this instinctive knowledge of the food that sometimes goes beyond this need that we have often in the modern age to define everything. And it's interesting because this is how a lot of the most famous recipes in Mexico get lost. Every single person that I know has at least a story of someone they know or their own story in which their grandmother or great-grandmother was one of the greatest chefs they ever met, and they refused to share the recipe for their favorite mole. And what is mole? Mole is a mixture of different spices and chilies. Sometimes it's got tomatoes in it, sometimes it's got chocolate in it, but ultimately it's just a delicious, rich sauce that you can eat on special occasions. And not only do different regions have different moles, and remember, the main ingredient is always chili, really, different combination of chilies, but different families, different people have different styles of mole. And so when a grandmother refuses to pass on her recipe out of spite to her descendants, it's the death of a very unique culinary tradition concentrated in one person.
This is true, but I will counter that a little bit, because with my great-grandmother, who I was very lucky to meet, she was that kind of person. She wouldn't give you the damn recipe. But talking to my grandmother about it, it is her theory that she didn't give you the recipe because there was no recipe. She just she had a sense of what she was going to do, but it kind of changed every time.
That's exactly my point. This is the same as that lady in the shop. Why do you want this? It's un puñito aquí, una pizca acá, it's a pinch here, a punch there, and that's how people cook. It's on the basis of how they feel their way through the kitchen. And ultimately, I think that's a lot of our relationship with chile, right? Is it spicy or not? Who knows? It's about your personal preferences of how spiciness should be in a specific plate, how your palate works. It's very much up to your local and your personal preference. And again, right, that's why it's such an important cultural aspect of Mexican life. But it's not necessarily something that people like to measure in the sort of Scoville way that people love to do in America. There's no such thing as that. Have you seen this thing where there'll be this box with a single Dorito in it, and it'll be covered in the most spicy sauce you've ever had, and you bite into it and it's supposed to ruin your life or something? That I've never seen that in Mexico. You can either eat the chili or you either can't eat the chili, but it's not made spicy so that you can prove something. It's made spicy because people are used to chili here and they enjoy the feeling.
Yeah, the idea of having a Dorito that is deliberately made to kill you sounds like literal torture. I don't know what you would want to do that.
Yeah, it's a stupid. I feel it's like a marketing ploy almost, but it's basically this concentration of the active ingredient in the chilies, and it's been turned into this biological weapon in chip form simply because you can. But there are actual genuinely useful uses to this sort of practice, because chili isn't only food. As you had mentioned, it was used as an anesthetic, it was used as an ointment, and we continue to have this tradition today. Pharmaceutical companies will continue to use, this isn't news to anyone, right? You know that aspirin comes from the willow tree, but chilies are very useful in themselves because they provide a lot of active ingredients for the pharmaceutical industry. Obviously, there's a lot of the things that you'd expect, right? Like anesthetics, whatever, but there's an interesting one that really jumped out to me, which is apparently the active ingredient in chilies is also used in some cases as the release mechanism in certain pills. And so how sometimes you need the pill to release in different parts of your digestive system. Apparently, one of the tools used to get that active ingredient out when it's inside of you comes from chilies.
Makes actually a lot of sense, because sometimes you'll be having a chili and you're like, this is fine. And then a minute later, this is absolutely not fine. I
don't know if it's that, but there is that wonderful phrase, which I will not translate. You'll have to look it up. It's el chile campana. Pica hoy y repica mañana. So ultimately, that's something that has been researched by pharmaceutical companies, but it's not chili generically, right? It's a specific sort of chili. It's been understood at a very deep chemical level. And this is why, beyond the deliciousness and the cultural richness of Mexican chilies, the diversity of chilies is also a massive window into pharmaceutical and healthcare opportunities. So losing diversity when it comes to chilies is also a disaster for our health as well, which is why it always makes me sad when I go into certain sort of shops in posher regions, and I'm sounding like the people who complain that La Condesa is not as spicy as it should be anymore. But I do decry the fact that you walk into a shop in a posh neighborhood and there'll be 2 chilies on offer. And that's such a shame, because if you go down to a working class market, there will be entire stalls with chilies I've never even imagined I've heard of.
Definitely. And it's wild also to see it, in these very standardized stores, sort of Walmart-owned and stores and the likes. If you go to the richer neighborhoods, they will always have some dried chilies on offer. But if you go to the more, working class neighborhoods, they'll have a ton, because this is just the reality. So, but also the sad thing is, But because that's the reality of most Mexicans, that they use a wide range of chiles, and simultaneously, I mean, in the richer classes, there's less and less of the use of these chilies because you have foreigners living around, but also because
there's ultimately a leaning in away from traditional Mexican cuisine, and so I think the great ironies about the posh neighborhoods is Mexican restaurants in neighborhoods like Polanco will either be a sort of traditional taco stand that is closing down because the zone has basically pushed them out of the neighborhood because it's so expensive. And then the other extreme where it's the Puyols, the Quintonils, which are incredibly posh, gourmet, Michelin star Mexican restaurants that cater mostly to foreigners.
Yeah, because the prices just don't make any sense. The price makes sense for someone living in New York, but it just doesn't make sense for a Mexican to go even like on a special occasion unless you belong to the super rich. Yeah, and going back to this loss of diversity more broadly, I think that's incredibly sad on so many levels. To me personally, the saddest part is that we're losing so much of broader Mexican culture, of the different sort of experiences that one can have in moles, in salsas, in adobos, which is, it's basically a sauce you use to like soak meat in for it to absorb the flavor, or not necessarily meat, it can be anything, and so many other applications of chile. But that is being lost slowly because it just doesn't make sense for like an industrial production of chile at an agricultural level to have so many different types of chiles, because obviously something that I mean, I didn't know this until relatively recently. It might be obvious to you, Alex, but I work a lot in wine, and in the case of wine, something that I learned was that for a particular grape, let's say for Pinot Noir, there's dozens of clones of Pinot Noir, because the Pinot Noir grape will have like slight variations here and there, and people want a particular clone because that one will have, I don't know, more fruit or whatever. But that doesn't happen just in grapes. That happens in everything, including in chiles. So even though you might be having a chile serrano, there are many types of chile serrano, and the chile serrano from this particular area will be spicier, and the chile serrano from this particular area will be more nutty or whatever. Industrial, mass-produced, any form of agricultural good loses a lot of these nuances in favor of it being disease resistant or rot resistant, but not necessarily in favor of flavor.
There's some wonderful coincidence, and maybe it isn't, in the fact that in Mexico, there are about as many chili species as there are ethnocultural groups in Mexico. So there's about 64 chili species, which is the amount of linguistic families in Mexico. But there are thousands of different variations, both of the languages, which are the dialects of the languages that are spoken, and in the same way, the sort of subspecies, the variations of a species, there's also thousands of them. So you're absolutely right. When we sort of urbanize or industrialize these processes, we lose a lot of the diversity. And yet, the market giveth and the market taketh away, because there is a little bit of a renaissance in the diversity of at least chili styles that you can approach because of the rise of chili sauces in the United States. A really fascinating thing is that a lot of the sauces that you'll see in a supermarket, back in the day, people used to make their own sauces. Why on earth would you get a sauce full of chemicals if you could just make your own sauce at home? A lot of people aren't doing that anymore. They want to keep their sauce for 3 months in the refrigerator. And so they'll buy an increasing variety of sauces in the supermarket. A really big one is tatemado sauces, which I hadn't seen in the supermarket ever. Could you explain what tatemado is?
So tatemado comes from a pre-Hispanic technique of literally just sort of charring the outside of different fruits and chilies. You grab your chile. You can do it directly on the flame or on a comal, which is a sort of pan that you used for making tortillas and heating up quesadillas and these kinds of things. And there you'll allow for the outside skin to burn off in a way. And that gives a smoky sort of charred taste to whatever you're making.
So you can buy a bottle of tatemado salsa tatemada. And it's wonderful because I think I said it was Americans, but actually it's the sort of transition into this urban lifestyle where a lot of people aren't making their sauces anymore. And so companies are offering a broader diversity of sauces. But there is one sauce to rule them all. And it's not Mexican at all, even though it has its origins in Mexico. Have you ever heard of Cholula, Tavo?
I have indeed. Not just the city.
The beautiful city in Puebla. Yeah.
Fantastic city in Puebla. But this is a very famous salsa that now you can find everywhere, including all over Mexico. You can get it in the supermarket in my town in Switzerland, which is the least Mexican place I can possibly think of.
Which should tell you a lot about the history of this salsa, because it is indeed a Mexican salsa that has found success all across the world because it became a corporate sellout. And thank God for that, for people like you who live far from Mexico and maybe don't have enough space in your bag to import it all the way to Switzerland. But the story is apparently this. It's a bit of a legend, but I love an apocryphal story, don't you? So the story is this. Apparently, one of the women who works for the Jose Cuervo family, the people who make that tequila in the state of Jalisco, came up with this sauce as a sangrita for the tequilas. A sangrita is the spicy tomatoey sauce that you'll drink alongside your tequila shot. Not downing it, but sipping, kissing away at it. And so this sauce was made as an accompaniment to tequila, apparently, so says the legend. And the woman apparently was torn between calling it Chapala, which is the massive lake near the tequila region in the state of Jalisco. But apparently she opted for another CH sound, the city of Cholula, because it had a deeper pre-Hispanic history. And so fast forward many years, I think basically 30 years. And in the year 2020, it went from being a local, but, industrialized Mexican spicy hot sauce to being bought by McCormick of mayonnaise fame. And in 2020, McCormick buys it for close to $800 million. This is a sauce that sells nowadays, or back then, I think it sells more now, it sells about $93 million annually in revenue. So it's a massive titan of a sauce, even though it comes in a sort of like little ditzy bottle. It's sort of trying to pull off this authentic look that people are always looking for. And yet you can find it in Switzerland, in a San Francisco pancake house. It's become almost like it's become almost like a fixture of the condiment section on a table at a diner. You've got the ketchup, you've got Tabasco sauce, you'll get the mustard, and you'll also have the Cholula hot sauce.
Here we get into tricky terrain, because when we talk about the loss of diversity in chilies, a lot of this is being driven by international titans, some of them from Europe, some of them from the US, that come in with their seeds that have been modified for mass production, but they destroy biodiversity in many cases. So that's terrible. We don't like that. And then furthermore, you have foreigners coming to Mexico and making the sauces less spicy, and this is outrageous, and we don't like that either. But despite all these things that we don't like, I must say that one of the things that Americans in particular, I think, are doing for Mexican cuisine is helping to, at least some of them, helping this diversity and richness of flavors to survive in the modern world. These grandmothers who refuse to write down the recipes and refuse to learn the names of the chiles and so on and write proportions, that's all very lovely and quaint, but the problem is modernity continues to trudge along and doesn't care about family traditions. And these things are lost. And something that I think is wonderful that you see in this sort of rise of pride of Latin American culture in the US in particular is people that have some sort of Latin American ancestry or have in some way been influenced by Latin American culture are now trying to reconnect with that culture, but bringing in sort of the know-how of American industrialism. And that helps to codify things, that helps to turn something that is beautiful and authentic and try to turn it into a company that can make money and can allow it to survive in the real world, at least in the modern world. And I think that's wonderful, because something that's incredibly sad is living away from India, for example. You go to any store in London, basically, and you can find a ton of Indian ingredients. The same for Thai ingredients, the same for many Chinese ingredients. But despite Mexico being a massive cultural titan, particularly with regards to its food, finding good, authentic Mexican ingredients outside of Mexico is so incredibly difficult and expensive. So hats off to these very industrious Americans and other foreigners.
But of course, you're absolutely right to an extent, right? There is so much diversity in the world of chilies that no amount of companies could possibly cover the large swathe of diversity that we've got. So we've gone from, risking losing 99% of chilies to 98% of chili diversity because of these efforts. Because as you said, you need to have industrial-sized plantations of exactly the same chili to keep the sort of industrial standardization up to scratch. There are other efforts that I really admire, based all around Mexico, but I'll mention one specifically, which is a project launched by Yuri de Gortari. And he was a gentleman who sadly died during the pandemic, which is more or less when I discovered him. And he was obsessed with going around the country and having old ladies tell him the strangest and weirdest recipes that they were making for their families and no one else knew about. And he was rescuing basically Mexico's culinary tradition. And one of the things he'd always remark upon was the fact that a lot of these recipes required pretty strange ingredients. And so the fact that he and his Mexican culinary school, which is what he founded later on, really helps to preserve not only the recipes, but in preserving the recipes, preserving the basic core ingredients. And so he'd go out and he'd find these books from the colonial age, which came mostly from the convents, where the nuns would be the great innovators of Mexican cuisine in this age of Spanish and indigenous combination. And they're the ones who came up with this wonderful concept of the moles and the wonderful concept of the chile en nogada. I think it's really interesting because the nuns have been robbed of their credit. We don't know exactly who came up with it, but we're almost certain it was the nuns who came up with a recipe for the chile en nogada long before Mexican independence, even though the myth says that the chile en nogada, which is a fascinating dish, it's a poblano chili stuffed with a combination of nuts and meats and fruits and whatever, and then covered in this sort of cold white sauce, creamy sauce made out of nuts, which is why it's called en nogada.
And sherry.
And sherry, exactly right. And then sprinkled with a bit of pomegranate. And that's sort of become the Mexican national dish, especially when it comes to celebrating independence. It's a seasonal dish that dates from sort of very late July all the way into sort of early October, more or less. That's sort of the peak season. And people used to say that a restaurateur in Puebla saw the man who would become emperor, Agustin de Iturbide, and he concocted this chili out of the colors of the Mexican flag, right? That's apparently not true. And everyone's sort of sad that it's not true because it feels sort of sweet that it's linked to our independence. But I actually love the actual story a lot better, which is a bunch of women in a convent working together and over the course of centuries and millennia, if you look back into the pre-Hispanic age, taking these traditions and these local ingredients with the chili at its center and creating this wonderful traditional dish that we still eat today.
And going back to the Colombian exchange, I think this is fantastic, right? Because we just said that there's sherry and there's nuts and there's chili, there's pomegranate. This is food that comes from all over the world. This dish could not have existed were it not for massive global trade that was occurring already in the 18th and 17th centuries. Pomegranate from India, nuts that came from India and then moved to Europe, sherry that came from the south of Spain, of course, chiles and other dried candied fruits that are used inside of the chile en nogada, and it all came together to produce this quintessentially Mexican dish.
So I think ultimately one can't talk about spiciness and chili without talking about the whole of Mexican cuisine, and yet it always brings us back to chilies. It's a wonderful fractal exploration of food because we go very, very broad and we always come back to chilies. And I think that's why it's worth having done a whole episode about this one style, one type, one sector of Mexican cuisine, because it's so distinctive. It's the core of the whole kit and caboodle. It's the sort of touchstone. And it is a delicious treat.
This was Tavo Figueroa.
And I'm Alex Gonzalez Omrod.
And this is Mexico, the podcast.
Every 2 weeks or so, we're talking about what makes Mexico the spiciest hot tamale in town.
Subscribe to the Mexico Political Economist. Give us a like, drop us a comment. Let us know what you think.